Ultimately, it's all about three things, really. You need to understand who you are, what you're about as an organization. You need to understand your strategy, where you're trying to take things, your mission, and then the strategy to get there. Actually being able to step back helps you enjoy that journey, which for me is just as important as the outcomes.
Hello, and welcome to the latest episode in Leadership Blueprint. Today, we're joined by Tim Bateman. As an ex-rugby professional with over 17-year glitzy career, he's now made the fantastic transition into an entrepreneur running New Zealand's fastest growing wellness franchise called Studio O. Tim and I got to meet each other at the Dubai Rugby Sevens when JOH Partners was sponsoring Riyadh Rugby. So I think it's a really interesting one. Tim's obviously looking at growing the career after rugby. He's doing some fantastic things. He's getting involved in some things in the Middle East as well. And I just thought he'd be a great person to have on the podcast today, learn a bit more about his journey, some of the lessons he's learned, and especially how he's taken that into the entrepreneur, setting up his own business and doing really well at it. So yeah, really excited for today. Tim, thanks so much for joining us. And I think it'd just be really good to get a kind of, couple of minutes overview from yourself just to fill in some of the gaps from my intro, and we'll then jump into some questions from there. So again, thanks, and over to you, mate.
Firstly, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be on here.
Yeah.
So OStudio, yes, it's you're right. It's a modern wellness franchise, I suppose, is the way we like to think about it. And I guess where it all comes from is my own personal journey. My wife has multiple sclerosis. She got very ill for a long period of time there, and my performance in rugby was really shaken by her health. And it just sort of showed me that actually my physical performance on the rugby field had nothing to do with me physically. It was all to do with what was going on elsewhere in her life and how it was impacting me sort of mentally and emotionally. So we wanted to create like a center or a wellness hub, or sort of one-stop shop really, where you can come and sort of step away from the madness for a little bit and look after yourself. So we have saunas and ice baths and plunge pools and float tanks. We do classes like yoga and Pilates and meditation, all types of different stuff, all in this area of well-being. And I suppose a good analogy is it's like the physical fitness industry maybe 50 or 60 years ago, where it was just sort of starting, where people were starting to understand actually looking after myself physically, working out is good for my health and well-being. What's sort of shifting now is people actually realize that actually stepping back, taking some time for yourself, working on that sort of recovery and wellness side is equally as good for you and equally as important, especially as life gets harder, because we all have battles. And so where do you go when you're battling? Hopefully something like OStudio.
No, absolutely. And I think it ties in really well with what we were saying, off air, was the link between mental health, sport, business. I think people are finally just getting more insight into that and just seeing the linkage. So I think there's that added thing with yourself of the personal story, which just makes it really, actually very powerful, which I think, again, the genuineness is quite key. So why do you think it's so successful? And is it literally your background, the story of what you're trying to achieve, or is there specific things that you were able to put in place in those early days? So yeah, talk us through the kind of the setting up from concept to, obviously initially trying to realize that your wife is so integral to your performance and your mental health, therefore your performance on the field, therefore helping her. When did that go from dealing with that part to there's an idea here that we could take forward and help other people with? How did it kind of go from one to the other?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the starting point there really is it's everyone has got some sort of battle on their hands. The difference for me was that everything was so measured. So in every single rugby game, every pass, every tackle, every kick, every acceleration, how much speed you're covering, like everything is so analyzed that you can really see when performance is good or performance is poor. And as a father or as a partner or as a worker, it's really hard to see how well your performance is. You don't really know when you're really working at your absolute optimum, but in high performance, you can really see that. And so Laura's health, if you overlay her health with my performance, it was like a mirror. So as her performance, as her health was really good, my performances were fantastic on the field. As her health was bad, it's horrific. And it wasn't as if I was slower or weaker or less fit that week. And so that was the starting point. That was really the concept of the idea. We went to Singapore for her to get a stem cell transplant. That was part of her sort of recovery process. She was in hospital in Singapore for about 5 months. and they recommended a thing called flotation therapy to us, where you're going into sort of a sensory deprivation type environment where the water is sort of highly salinated. So you get 500 kilograms of Epsom salts. So you can sort of float up on top of the water. There's music that plays under the water to help you sort of relax into it. You're in your own sort of big cabin that you can walk around in. So they're big spaces. But the full experience would be that you turn the light off and stay still. And when the music fades out, the water, the air, and your skin all becomes the same temperature. So you actually lose the sensation of the air, of the water. You can't actually feel that whether you're underwater or out of water. So you're trying to take all stimulation off the body. And so once again, for Laura, her illness was that it was just huge amounts of stress, putting pressure on her sort of nervous system, I guess. So that was like a massive reset for her. And I started using floating as a way to sort of use it as a visualization tool for rugby, and to sort of, once again, step away from the madness. So I retired from rugby at that time because we had to come back to Christchurch. And so we came back to Christchurch, and we started a business in flotation therapy called Cloud9 Float Club. And our first week we had 126 people book in, and it just showed us that actually we're not the only ones battling with something here. And we've still got that business that's been running for 9 years now. And it's sort of, once again, it showed us that there's something here. But my take on that was floating is not for everyone, and it's only such a niche market. I want to go wider with us and create something that's a wider approach that would attract lots of different types of people. And so we came up with the concept of OStudio. So it genuinely is, a story of OStudio comes from my own personal challenges and Laura's personal challenges, and just seeing how that relates to lots of other people in society in different industries.
No, and again, I go back to it's so lovely when you're able to take adversity and turn it into such a positive. And again, there's a lot of mental strength on that. So, I think, and also just shows how strong you are as a married couple and things. So, that's always just great stories to hear and understand. And I think it's something we probably, my marriage is good, but I'm not sure I'd be able to be as supportive as you were. So well done, mate. Seriously.
Oh, thank you. No, it's certainly not perfect, like anything.
So I'm interested with, obviously this was something at the time that was pretty much not there in New Zealand. Did the idea, you said it come obviously from therapy and stuff. Did you have any input from your time in Japan? Did it come purely from the medical, practitioners? Where did the kind of exposure to that first bit come from for Laura and so on? I think that's the bit. Was it your playing career, you're in different environments, and that opened up your guys' thought process, and then it kind of grew from there? Or was it, a medical practitioner had been overseas and they exposed you guys? How did the first bit take off there?
It was a bit of a combination of both. So, we were traveling through my rugby, we were traveling all through the States, Canada, the UK, Japan. We traveled lots and lots of different places with rugby. And so this little experience that I had in Singapore, it sort of opens up something up in me. I remember sort of thinking to myself, actually, there is something here. There's something more than just being physically strong and being a better player. And so I wanted to start delving into that. So I started looking at things like meditation and like yoga, and how heat can change the body, how cold can change the body, how stress impacts performance. I mean, it's obvious now when you see it, like how if you want to perform optimally at work or at home, then you've got to be in a state where you can perform optimally, and that's not a stress state. You can't think as clearly, you can't communicate as clearly, you can't focus as clearly. There's a huge amount of things that it's restricting you from doing. So all my rugby trips would turn into sort of scouting trips at the same time, where I'd go and see every yoga studio, every Pilates studio. I'd go to sauna places or sort of relaxation retreats, and sort of see what was working and what wasn't, and then sort of try and build together what that came. So visiting lots of individual locations, but also some of the things that we do in OStudio came from the medical field. So there's these things called Normatec compression pants that you step into, and they sort of, it's like a massage or a lymphatic massage on your legs. You're sort of draining your legs effectively. That comes from the medical field, where people are in hospital for a long time, and they saw what that did for people in hospital, and so it moved across into the high performance athlete space, and now it's sort of moving into the mainstream. So, like if you go into a high performance sporting environment now, they have all these things available. They have saunas,
Yeah.
they have ice baths, they have things that are designed to help you sleep better, to help you be less stressed, to manage pain more effectively, be able to be more focused. So we wanted to take all of that out of just the small group of athletes really to give access to everyone, because once again, performance shouldn't just be about performing good on a rugby field or on a hockey pitch. It should be about performing well in life.
No, 100%. And during your playing career, you play for some big clubs, Crusaders, Hurricanes, and others. And this question might sound like I'm asking you to talk negatively on them, and it's absolutely not. But during the time when you could see your performance being affected by what's going on at home, how did they respond, try and help you? What were they trying to do to support that just wasn't helping you? Or was it didn't matter what they did, they couldn't help because your focus was purely on Laura? And I'm just intrigued to see, how did they try and acknowledge and try to deal with it, but it didn't work? I mean, it's just interesting to see what was their response, and how did it just not quite hit the mark? And not because they weren't trying, but just simply, they weren't able to fix Laura. The balance of that, how did that kind of play out?
No, it's a really good question. So, I mean, they had lots of wraparound sort of tools that you could lean into, but my tendency really was like, if I have a problem and fix this myself, and I was quite closed off to like asking for help. And it all probably came to a head one preseason actually with the Hurricanes. It was in 2012 or 2013, it may have been actually. And we turned up to training in the preseason. It was 3:00 in the afternoon, and we're getting put through the absolute ringer. The Army were there actually, and they were just absolutely slamming us. Anyway, long story short, we trained all through the night. Like, I mean, literally carrying, climbing up hills. Like, just it was so. The last task was setting up a big tent at 10 a.m. the next morning. So we didn't know that this was going to happen. So they'd physically like broken us. We did like an day at 4 a.m. in the morning on strategy, and it was very intense. Anyway, we put up a tent at 10 a.m. and then had 2 hours sleep, and then we went straight back into sort of one-on-one sort of group feedback exercises. And so pretty much you all had to give each other feedback face to face in these groups. And it was like the things that you're doing really well and the things that you could be doing better. And literally, as the feedback went around the table to me about things I was doing well, or things, it was this consistent message was like, mate, if only you saw yourself like we do, like we can see that you're battling. We just wish that we were able to help more, and you're a good person. You're doing your best. And I just broke down. I really did. I literally just, it's still to this day one of those more embarrassing moments that I've had. A group of big, strong rugby players, All Blacks, legends of the game, and I'm bawling as they're giving me all this positive feedback. But what it sort of showed me, I guess, was like, no matter how much you think you're hiding the challenges that you're going through, people can see it if they're close enough to you. They could see that I was really struggling, and me shouldering that burden by myself was not helpful to anyone. And so I sort of, released that, became a little bit more, asking for help when I needed it. And they really helped, because literally there was times where we'd have 2 young girls, I would have got them up, off to school, got everything sorted, go train hard all day. You've got 10 people behind you trying to steal your position, come home, and Laura's, she hasn't been able to do anything all day because she's absolutely ruined. And so then I was pretty much having to be mum, dad, everything, and on all areas. And it was just really, really hard for a long time there. Once again, this is not abnormal. I'm not abnormal here. There's lots of people who have lots of different challenges in life, but
absolutely,
it was definitely, but it was a tough moment for us. And what I realized is actually asking for help and actually getting some support is not weak, not fluffy. It actually helps you perform, which is ultimately what you're trying to get in rugby. If I wanted to perform better on the field, I needed to put these types of things in place to manage stress and to get a bit more support.
No, 100%. And I think what's really interesting with what you've mentioned there is that acknowledgement or that environment and release valve to let it out and ask for help. But even now, when you're explaining, you're explaining your story, you're explaining how you guys dealt with it, there's still that societal thing where you feel like you have to say, but there are people worse than me. I don't want to say that I'm being a martyr. It's still, even though you guys have done it, you've gone through, I think that's something on society that maybe we still need to work on as human beings, is I'm not trying to say I'm better or worse. I'm just trying to say this was hard for us and these were what we had to do, but that we still feel that need to almost apologize that I'm not trying to say I'm the worst, we had it worst. It's an interesting dynamic. It's society.
I
agree.
And it's the challenge there too is the hardest thing you've ever been through is the hardest thing you've ever been through, regardless of whether that's a 5-year-old who's just stubbed their toe or whether you're, someone that's really dealing with some serious health concern. It's all relative. It's literally and that was for us the hardest thing we'd ever been through. And so, 100%. It's probably the only way I can really explain it. Is some people have what would objectively be way harder, but actually, the way it's felt internally is quite similar.
100%, and everyone has, everyone has the basket case in-laws. Everyone has the boss they don't like. Everyone has this problem, but there's elements that push you a bit further. There's elements where we've all had that breakdown moment. So I think it's definitely interesting. So from the time in rugby, was that moment there we discussed, is that probably your biggest leadership lesson learned that you've taken into the entrepreneurial next chapter of life, or were there other sort of key lessons learned from the pitch that you've been able to take forward, aside from the obvious of a routine, but were there other sort of standout moments that really shaped you?
Huge amounts. Like I was lucky enough to play with some of the best players in the world for a long time, and guys like Dan Carter. I played with Dan Carter for 4 years. I played with Bowden Barrett for 4 years. I played with Richie Mwanga for 4 years. Captains like Kieran Reid and Richie McCaw, and coaches like Scott Robertson, Robbie Deans, Wayne Smith, like some of the best in the world, in this part of the world anyway, that have been. And so I was exposed to a huge amount of learnings that I've taken across into business. I suppose without going into too much detail, probably the one that really sticks out the most for me is how to create a culture of high performance, or a culture of success. And I've played in teams where we've had the best roster and been unsuccessful, and I've also played in teams that we've had a potentially not as strong a roster and then put on record back-to-back titles. I was part of 4 of the Crusaders' 7 titles in a row. And really that was all around leadership and culture. It really was. And they sound like fluffy things, but once again, they aren't fluffy. They're the things that can make a huge difference. And so I've sort of taken a lot of those lessons and built them into our foundation of OStudio, and I've seen those rewards already too. So there's so many similarities between sport and business. It's really, can you find them? How do you implement them? Business is it's the infinite game. Where rugby's finite, you've got to start and a finish and clear goals, clear sort of winners and losers. Business is one of those ones where it's an infinite game, and often you can feel like you're losing, but you're making these little gains that then become very big games quickly.
100%. The 1% margin, I forget the exact stat, but it's like you're 1% better every day. By the end of the year, it's the compounded effect is much bigger than you think. It's actually quite crazy. I'll find it and I'll stick it in the comments of this video. It is way more than I thought it would be. There's been studies done on this. In terms of, is there a lesson that you realized it didn't work? What was the biggest mistake? Is there something that, what was the biggest mistake from your experiences there in terms of building a culture, leadership, etc.?
Well, the biggest one for me personally was being terrified of making mistakes and being terrified of failing. And early in my career, so I'm naturally a smaller guy, but I played in the midfield. So I was playing against guys like Martin Nonu, Sonny Williams, big, strong,
big guys,
big, strong ball carriers that are destructive. And that's the position I played. So I needed to be really good technically and tactically to perform. And part of that was being able to tackle really well. I'm not naturally a good tackler. And so you'd think that I would have leant into every tackle drill possible to learn how to tackle well. But I didn't. I avoided it massively because I didn't want the guys to find out that I was a shit tackler at training. And so it wasn't until I really flipped that around and being like, unless I'm making mistakes regularly, I'm not performing. Like, I have to be making mistakes regularly. I have to be working right on that boundary of comfort. So if I'd go through a week and it was too easy. I just knew I hadn't grown. And so by the end, and that's the same in business, you've got to be right, pushing on the edge of risk all the time. If you're waiting too long till it's the perfect moment, it's gone. It's too late. You've got to be, if you've got a fully developed product before you release the product, you're a year too late. You know what I mean? You learn most. I really believe you sort of learn to build the plane as you fly, you know, in business, because it's the constant feedback that your iterations that make things better. And so, yeah, being comfortable with imperfection and pushing forward without a perfect plan or a perfect thing in play. And that's not to say that being super detailed and planning is really important, because we are that. But at the same time, we can't let any uncertainty stop our progress. We've got to keep pushing forward, because you figure things out as you go. You've just got to have good people around you and a huge work ethic. And so my biggest learning really was being too scared to make mistakes. Yeah.
That's interesting. It's really interesting. And I think, you know, you see that a lot with, especially with newer technology companies. It is that you're absolutely right. You cannot wait till it's 100% there. You have to go with, you know, 80% is good enough, and then you tweak as you go. And also you need that customer experience and feedback. And I think that's the key bit, is too many assumptions are made or too many think tanks are done to, you know, what would you do in this scenario? It's actually, you need the live data. You need that feedback on the spot experience. This worked, this didn't. I was chatting to an individual just yesterday, and their whole career has been around basically doing very short, quick, soft launches to understand the customer and the internal company's employees' experience, modify, and get the real thing live as soon as possible. And that's been their whole career. And they do very well out of it, because a lot of people don't get it right at all, or they overanalyze it, or they don't get the right things in there. What's been so from athlete to what you're doing now, what's been the kind of public's biggest misconception on sort of workplace wellness? What's the biggest thing that you're trying to overcome their misconception on?
I think it's a fantastic question. It's the core question, really, because like where I think the biggest misconception is that wellness is just a nice thing to do, that it's just a treat, that it's something that's just, you know, a bit fluffy, a bit sort of loose. Honestly, wellness for me is performance. They are the same thing. Yeah, it's about, if you're trying to get better, if you want to be able to perform better in whatever role it is, thinking about things like stress, thinking about things like sleep, thinking about how you can get in the right brain state to make better decisions, to communicate more effectively, to be more creative. These things are performance tools that aren't relevant just to sport. They're relevant to solving any problem or being good at anything. And so it's that whole, like, take one step back so that you can take two steps forward. I think and it's really counterintuitive to driven people, you know, to really driven people who are trying to push and move forward. It's almost like taking a break feels like, oh, you know, that whole I'll sleep when I'm dead, that sort of saying. You know, it's like, no, I'm going. It's like, actually, mate, if you want to go further, faster, stronger, actually taking time to rest and recover. And this is not rocket science, but I think it's just in the psyche today that wellness or taking time for yourself is a soft sort of cop out. That's what we need to change. It's not that. It's about performance. It's like, I mean, it's when you're lifting weights, you don't grow muscle when you're lifting weights. You grow when you're in that recovery state, and how well that muscle grows is all depending on how much you recover, how well you recover. It's exactly the same with any type of work. If you're constantly focused on doing, you're not gonna. You've got to have that exhale alongside the inhale. It's all about getting that balance right. And once again, this is not about, hey, everyone needs to be soft and take time out. It's actually about performance for me. And performance isn't just about results. It's about enjoying it. You know, like for me, high performance is three things. It's getting the outcomes that you're after, so getting the goals that you want, but it's consistency over time. Like, everyone can do something well for a year. You know, we can all go on some sort of training program or eat well or look after ourselves or be good to people for a year, but how consistent can you be across time, location, environment? And then thirdly, enjoying the process, enjoying the journey. Like I know people that have been extremely successful, got the outcomes they wanted to. They were super consistent over a long period of time, but they hated it. Is that high
Yeah.
performance? I don't want to get to the end of my life and be like, Jesus, that was it. So actually being able to step back helps you enjoy that journey, which for me is just as important as the outcomes.
Fantastic analysis there. And I think the bit of people achieving but being miserable it's going to resonate with a lot of people. And I personally know people that is the scenario, and they can't relax. And maybe I'll direct them to yourself and tell them to go on a holiday to New Zealand, because they could do with some of this, I tell you. But yeah, it's very telling.
But the irony
So
is here, just really quickly, just sorry to labor on the point, but like anything, it's like if you want to become stronger, you can't just do 3 weight sessions and all of a sudden you're strong. If you want to if you want to have a healthy lifestyle, you can't just eat healthy for a week. It's not rocket science stuff, but it's about building small little things into your day, small little things into your week, small little things into your month. It's not, once again, they're not these big drastic things. You've just got to be able to get your body out of that sympathetic nervous system and into that sort of rest and digest state. And there's really easy ways you can do that. And so just dedicating time to get yourself out of that stress response is all it is. It's not as little and often, but it doesn't just happen. It takes a long period of time. Yeah.
No, 100%. And I think while I personally found the book a little bit of a hard read, I think the book Atomic Habits is all about that. You know, what is the end goal? Break it down into a lot of little goals, and then it will become a behavioral change, because you can't just go for the end result straight away. And that's where everyone fails it. You know, they're only focused on the end goal, but how did you get there? So, and it ties into your statement around, take that moment to relax, take the step back. It's in business, it's the helicopter view. Whatever your role is, whether you're at the top, whether you're in the middle or you're at the bottom of the food chain, you can still take a step back and look at, what am I actually doing? Where is, even in a low level role, where can I make small changes that would improve the service, that would improve my mental health, all of these things. I think sometimes we're guilty of just saying, well, we've always done it that way, I better just do it faster, that's how I'm gonna do it better. Well, that's that actually can not give any good results and just lead to more stress, and ultimately compound the problem, as we've been discussing. So yeah, it's definitely. So when you started off, you mentioned initially with the baths idea, there was just a great uptake straight away. So maybe this next question doesn't quite fit, or maybe when it becomes Wellness Studio, sorry. How did you overcome some of the challenges of setting up? Because any business being set up, there's a good idea, some things go well, but some things don't go to plan, overcoming a bit of that adversity. How did you overcome some of those initial kind of hurdles, and what were some of the previous lessons learned off the rugby pitch and in life that kind of helped you overcome some of those hurdles?
There's probably nothing rocket science in this either, but like surrounding yourself with the right people is crucial. Like, I've had a really good team, and I've had some team members that have made things a lot harder. If you ultimately, it's all about 3 things really. You need to understand who you are, what you're about as an organization. You need to understand your strategy, where you're trying to take things, your mission, and then the strategy to get there. But really, everything outside of that is environment. If 70% of your behaviors are shaped by your environment, it is a fact. And so, if you want your behaviors to be conducive to what you're trying to achieve, you have to set your environment up in that way. A good analogy here is, if you want to eat well, don't have lots of crap food sitting around you. Your environment's full of crap food. The reality is you're gonna engage in that. If you want to be successful in business, surround yourself with successful business people who are smart and can support that there. So getting good people around me is crucial. There's no shortcut. It is just hard work. There's no anyone that says there's a silver bullet towards any of this sort of stuff, I just don't believe it. I really believe that those silver bullet, it may seem like a silver bullet at times, but that silver bullet's come off years of small little things that have given them that opportunity to be in that right time, that right place at the right time. So surround yourself with good people, work really hard, be clear on what you're trying to achieve, don't compromise on your values, and just go for it, because why not? Get one crack, get one crack at life. If you want to have a go, but really everything outside of that is environment.
And I think it's there's nothing wrong with giving it a go. And we were speaking off air, I've had a career before moving into executive search, and I think, if you try something that's not quite right, you've tried it, you've done it, you gave it your all, but it wasn't for you. There's no shame in that. Move on, and cut the cord and get on to the next thing and get it to go from there. So you've kind of had two obviously very distinct careers, on the pitch, off the pitch. We've spoke about some of the things that you've said they're not rocket science. I would do these things. What's been the thing that surprised you that you thought would translate across and just hasn't at all? Because there's the obvious ones. There's things like, because I've done this, that was easier, or because I've done this, that's benefited me here. But what surprised you? What was something where you just went, I thought it was this, and it absolutely isn't? Completely had to rewire my way of thinking and things.
I would say it's the feedback loops. So it's really the thing I found really challenging is how hard it is to know what's working and what's not. Like in rugby, it's really easy, and so my ability to assess what's happening and then make changes. I was making changes too quickly in business because once again in rugby, it's like, you have a game one week and you're kicking poorly. As a team, your strategy and kicking you can put focus on that, and literally within 1 week you can change your whole kicking strategy and fix that area of the game. So your feedback loops are really fast. In business at the beginning, if I put something out and it wasn't working, I would think to myself, there's something wrong here, I need to do something different. There's something wrong, I need to do something different. Whereas actually just the feedback loops are a lot slower. So actually integrating a new system or some sort of new campaign with some sales technique or some sort of marketing technique, those feedback loops, you need more data points and more time before you really know whether something's working or not. And so that was probably the big one for me, is getting clear on how long it takes to really know whether something's working or not. Because in our industry, we know that wellness is a thing. We know that wellness is becoming more understood, more accepted, more practiced, which is our whole goal with OStudio, is that's what we're trying to achieve. Do we know what the perfect vehicle is to create a one-stop shop for wellbeing? No, we don't. We've got what we think it is now, but we want little iterations of that going on in different locations around New Zealand to really understand what does catch. Because I think back 60 years ago, when the first gyms were coming out, I guarantee you there was lots of gyms that thought they had the formula and they fell away. It was the gyms that really listened to the market and tweaked things as they went to ultimately stay ahead of what that winning product is. That's really where I think we are at the moment. I think we've got a model that we can scale now. We just genuinely do. We've got the ability to scale internationally. I know that. But at the same time, we've got to really watching closely how that needs to look different in Australia, how that needs to look different in America, how that needs to look different in somewhere like the Middle East, wherever it ends up being that we go. It's because it's not just take it here and put it there, take it here and put it there. We've got to be really, really smart around how it's going to fall in each market. Yeah.
100%. I think it's the customer feedback, the customization, those things are really key. And, it's great to hear you saying that. You spoke there about, try an idea, if it doesn't work, or try an idea, look at the data, if it doesn't work, change, pivot, etc. Are there key, and I know it's different for every market and every business, but are there key things that you look at where you say, this now doesn't work? Is there a point where, is it a time thing? Is it a particular metric? Before you start a new idea, do you say, we're going to give it 3 months, and if we haven't hit X number, that's our cutoff? And are you completely rigid with that? Is there a bit of flexibility? How do you pull the plug? How do you monitor and pull the plug? Is there a KPI, a gut feel? Where does it kind of come from? 100%. I think it's the customer feedback, the customization.
A bit of all of that, really. But so KPI reporting on our key metrics. Once again, talking with people who have done this before. Franchising something is not new. Franchising something like we're franchising is definitely new, like a wellness one-stop shop for well-being. But so I meet with lots of people who have franchised gyms, franchised restaurants, franchised cafes, franchised all sorts of different stuff, and tried to find out what they did well and what they didn't do well. But just one small example is a big part of our business is location based, and so people come onto our sites and use our services. We can do stuff off-site, but a huge part is. And so how do you ensure that every square meter within your space is optimized for revenue and for customer success? So having a real honest, hard look at the types of services that are really successful in driving revenue, and being prepared to pull those out, pull out the ones that aren't, and try something new. And so an example of that, we had this thing called a recovery space where there's all sorts of recovery tools that people can use. We had a heap of seats where people could use, and then we had private sauna and ice bathrooms that took up about the same amount of space. We could take half of that recovery space away and add a new private sauna and ice bathroom in that same space. We knew we'd drive way more revenue. And so it's a bit of a combination of looking honest and hard at what you're doing, and then being prepared to make those changes. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's sort of how we see it.
100%. I think it's, an analogy that maybe, I get what you're saying, but I think an analogy that's worth saying in case a listener's not quite getting their head around it is like a decision on a restaurant, how many tables, where the positioning is, how does that impact, the amount of, again, do you set a minimum time at a table, spend per customer, all that other stuff, it's just your version of that, which is very relevant. And I think it's really interesting to hear, even though you've said holistic wellness and, you've used the word fluffy one or two times, still business. There's still something that we're trying to fix a problem, but it's a business, and we've got to get this right. And, there are still some cold, hard things to get on with here. And I mean, that's why it's working. You've got the balance. We've got the messaging, we've got the story, but we've also got the cold, hard facts. And I think sometimes people, they lean too far one way or the other. And so they don't have the story, they're just doing the metrics, or they've got the story and not the metrics. And, so I think you've got the balance. So, kudos to you for that one.
Well, I think a really good small analogy before we go to the next question is so the staff time to clean and change over a room before the next person. So we'll have like space between those booking times, but we've gone from 7 minutes down to just under 1 minute that it takes a staff member to do to sort of reset and change that room. And that's really just design and forward thinking around where things are placed and where things water drains and where all that sort of stuff. And so that's saving 6 minutes for every single float that goes on everywhere in New Zealand. If you think about how much time that compounds on itself, where that staff member can now connect with a customer in front of them and build a good relationship and offer them good solutions to the challenges that are going on in their life and sell to them effectively. That's exponential, that opportunity there. So every area of our business has been looked at like that. How can we optimize this to be better?
It wouldn't surprise me, and again, I'm not asking for numbers, but it wouldn't surprise me if those 6 minutes probably are making you 10% more revenue, purely around more people in the door, simply more, a bit more time to cross sell, have that build the relationship, get the repeat customer, all of these knock on effects. So yeah, I mean, that's a great analogy, 6 minutes versus, what actually does 6 minutes equate to? A heck of a lot of money, actually. That's a really good one.
Exactly.
Yeah. As I said, we've kind of, I could talk to you all day, but I think, we've said when we started out, we're going to try for a little bit of a shorter episode. I think we're hearing people's feedback that the slightly shorter episodes are doing that a little bit better. So, while I'd love to chat to you all day, I think we'll kind of move on to a bit of a wrapping up kind of scenario. If we were to sort of take today and say, a couple of closing statements. Now, this might be things we've discussed today. These might be things that we haven't discussed today. So this can be a little bit of a summary / bringing in, some final thoughts. So if you were to have sort of a message for a bit of a younger self, a bit of a maybe athletes or professionals transitioning a career. So maybe transition to another role within corporate, or sports people transitioning from sport to corporate, and then a kind of a final closing statement if you've got one, kind of. So maybe the sort of the free sort of ABC would be a great way to kind of finish it off today. Kind of the younger, the transition, and the what next maybe kind of thing would be a really cool way to finish up today for sure.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think you've nailed the questions today. Actually, some of the better ones I've had. I'm genuine when I say that, because it's really causing me to think. I'd say my younger self, it would be something around that you've just got to back yourself. Like, back yourself, mate. Like, and like, I think I needed to hear that a little bit more. I really doubted myself. I doubted my ability and second guessing lots of things that were going on. And like, the reality is, I had the skill set. I had the ability, and any of those sort of little doubts, they weren't helpful, for me in those early years. So, if I could go back to my 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old self, I'd tell them, mate, don't worry, you got this, back yourself. I think as I've transitioned into this sort of next phase, and what I can see coming ahead, I think that the advice that I give to people in a similar position or are looking at doing something like that is really think about the cost of inaction. Like, most people think about the cost of action, the risk that taking a certain step brings them, moving somewhere, changing job, going into a relationship. They think about the risks associated with doing the thing. They don't think too much about the risks of not doing the thing, because I think, if you think about, take an example of going into a business, starting a business, it's like, yeah, it's really easy to think about all the bad things that could happen by starting a business, but actually really think about the cost of not doing. What's it going to cost you emotionally, financially, mentally, enjoyment wise, by not doing the thing as well. And so I think when people really assess that, it gives them a little bit more confidence. Actually, you're choosing your hard, really, aren't you? It's going to be hard doing it, and it's going to be hard not doing it. But I think most people just look through that initial lens. So, because I'm a firm believer that we just get one crack while we're here, and why not? Like, back yourself, have a go, work on something meaningful, because at the end of the day, we get one shot.
Yeah. You want some good stories to have to tell the grandkids, That's also part of it, mate. That's part of it. And then in terms of a kind of, this can be the future of the industry, this could be the future of what next for you, this could be the future of where you'd like to see, people take, wellness. Is there a kind of a future statement? You can take that any way you want, personal, holistic, industry. What's kind of the future, mate?
Well, our North Star, or the thing that pulls us in moves us in that direction, is that we want to make this wellness, or holistic wellness. And I don't love the word holistic. It still brings up that fluffy sort of side in my mind somewhere, but this full picture of well-being, holistic well-being, is understood, is accepted, and is practiced as physical fitness. So if you think about right now around the world, you've got people training physically, doing marathons, going to gyms, because they know that it's good for their health and well-being. Like, what I'm shooting for is that people will look back in 60 years' time and be like, do you remember there never used to be those places that you go to and they had all these services around well-being? And like that's what I'm shooting for, is to make it as understood, as accepted, and as practiced. When I say as understood, it's like education. If you ask the everyday person, what's a framework for physical health, most people will give you a good answer. If you want to get stronger, you lift weights. If you want to work on your cardiovascular health, go for a run. Want to get flexible, stretch. If you talked about that in the holistic wellness space, it's like, what do you do about stress? It's like, oh, I know it's important. Like, what can you do about stress? It's like, how important is sleep, and how do you optimize it? It's like, okay, maybe, what does heat actually do to the body? What's it doing to your heart? Why is it reducing your all-cause mortality by such a huge amount? What's it actually going on there? What is cold? Why would I get in an ice bath? Why is that important? I would love to educate just as well. But this is why podcasts are important to me, because people get to understand, actually there's a little bit more to it than just something nice. So understood, accepted is like a lot of people look at this once again with a bit of a stigma that this is for other people, this is for my wife, or this is for my friend, or this is for my whoever, because it's for them, it's not for me. but I want it to be accepted that it's a good thing to do. And then lastly, it's practice. It's just as practice. People are taking just as much time to work on their holistic wellness than they are on just their physical fitness. So that's our North Star. That's what we're shooting towards. Will we ever achieve it? Who knows? But we'll be shooting for it. That's for sure. That's for sure.
Gotta have a goal. Gotta have a goal, mate. I think, in closing, I think the thing that will help you is things like Aura rings, things like that. Like I've got one. I don't have it on today, but I think the sleep we all know about, but I think the body heat, stress, that stuff. It's been interesting for me personally to see some of that data. Like I sometimes joke, I'm like, oh, that's when I was looking after the kids. Stress, that kind of stuff. But it's very telling. There are some definite things. Again, small changes, big difference. So no, it's very cool. Look, Tim, love today. It's been really cool, mate. I think the journey in terms of everything you've done is fantastic. I'm really excited to see how it goes from here. Looking forward to seeing one of these things in the Middle East, in Dubai. I'm sure that'll be on the radar. So let's keep the conversation going on that. And for the listeners, please do like, subscribe, and share. And I hope you've enjoyed today. And if you want to know more about this, please do reach out to Tim directly and ask him a bit more. And we'll go from there. But thanks so much again for your time, mate. Have a great day.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. And once you do, feel free to reach out. I mean, my email is tim@ostudio.co.nz if anyone wants to talk about any of this or is interested in any of this. I'm always happy to chat. So I appreciate the time. Great questions once again, Oliver. Awesome.
Thanks, mate. Have a great day.